Today I am making the decorative Kumiko vent cover for my terrarium that is trying to be a fusion between fine furniture and plant husbandry and art and vivarium culture. And wait until, I don't know, like a couple months from now when it's done and you'll see. I've got a 67.5, a 22.5, and a 45-degree angle cutting jig for the Kumiko strips. Now what I have to do is make a jig so that I can cut the slots, the little half-lap slots that fit together so that all of the little pieces of wood can be joined into one beautiful, coherent, complex, and lovely pattern. That is what is going on. I made Kumiko strips, and then I realized there was an easier way to make them perfect. What I've done is I've gone to the hardware store and I picked up a bunch of paint stirrers for free. That way I can cut them all to the same width and then rely on the paint stirrers to get me to the exact same thickness. It's a much better way for me to get around not having the skills needed to do this in an efficient manner. What's next is I have to make a bunch of little slots in these strips so that they can fit together in grids like this. You can see one of these has broken off there. It's a cut halfway down so that they can meet up in the middle and slot together. So that means I have to be able to make slots that are consistently a tiny bit smaller than the thickness of these pieces so that they can have a little bit of friction fit. That is why thickness is so important on these and so important for me to get consistent, hence the paint stir thing. But before I can do any of that, I have to glue up the 45-degree miter that makes the top surface of the vent. So glue up, then Kumiko. Okay, so the part I was dreading. I have done a lot of the mindless work for the Kumiko, but now I actually have to think. Here is what we've got going on. Right there is kind of the starting mock-up for half of what I have to do. That is going to be the left or right, doesn't matter, vent cover for the terrarium. The thing is, what I actually have to use my brain for, there are, in what you see right there, 16 separate pieces of wood. On top of that, spread amongst these pieces of wood, there have to be 56 more that make up each individual pattern in each one of these 8 squares. In each square, there have to be 7 separate pieces of wood, all the way down to nearly like 1/4 of an inch long, with precise angles on both ends so that they all fit together. If this square right there is not square, none of that works. So I need to figure out the maximum size square I can make given the distance that I've got here, and then I have to figure out where exactly to make each one of the cuts that slot into each other from these horizontal pieces and these vertical pieces to have everything even and have everything completely square, otherwise none of this will work. There's a bit of play, but not really, if I'm being real. That's what I have to do, and I have to make sure each one of them is in the completely right place and completely even. So I have to do some math, and then I'm gonna make some jigs and then figure this out so it doesn't all get screwed up. I've got it figured out. Originally, I wanted to have a 3mm overhang on each side of this. So this would stick out 3mm further than the horizontal piece, and then the horizontal piece would stick out 3mm further over here on the other side of the vertical piece. However, the entire length of the long horizontal pieces is 240mm. Now, if you account for the 3mm thickness of each one of these vertical pieces, as well as 3mm between each one of the double slats, and then 3mm on each side, you get in total 63mm of that 240 that's taken up by either gap or thickness of a strip. So 240 minus 63, that leaves you 177 free millimeters. Now, there are 8 boxes, so we can say 177 divided by 8, that gives us 22.125, 22 and an eighth millimeters for the maximum width of each one of these boxes. Now, working in eighths of a millimeter, that's just not really going to work for me with the tools I've got and the wood. I don't know anyone who works in eighths of a millimeter with wood. Regardless, so I'm calling that 22 millimeters. Now, the vertical pieces here, these are 37 millimeters long. Now 37 millimeters, now you have to account for the 3 millimeter overhang on each side, as well as the 3 millimeter width on these, which is gonna be 3 times 12, 12. So 12 from 37 gives you 25 millimeters. So that gives you 25 millimeters of working space here. Now 25 vertically and 22 horizontally, that leaves you 25. That's 3 millimeters too long. On the vertical side, our square is out of square. Now all our angles are wrong. So we have to shorten the 25 to 22. So we have to add 1.5 millimeters on each side of this overhang. So now instead of 3, that overhang right there is going to be 4.5 millimeters. We're still going to have a 3 millimeter overhang on each side. And now we're going to have 22 by 22 millimeter squares in each one of these 8 squares. And that should give us everything we need to make this with the correct angles. So now I just have to build a couple jigs that let me cut all of those precisely without screwing everything up. And because it worked so well last time, I'm revisiting the stacked plywood method for making jigs that I used to make the first set of jigs for the angles. I'm cutting the slots in that jig that's clamped down over there so that I can cut all of the specifically placed slots in those long pieces in one fell swoop. But this is the size of section I'm taking out of there with the handsaw to give you an idea of how slow I'm trying to go to get little sections like this very accurately with the handsaw. I'm also kind of proud of this. Back to it. It is a week later, and I've got some problems to talk about. The jig for cutting all of the cuts in those longer horizontal pieces, it's done. However, it's a little bit wrong. You see, all of these slots, they correspond to those slots cut in the long horizontal pieces. And if you remember right, those long horizontal pieces, they are 240 millimeters. And I wanted to have 3 millimeters of overhang on each side. Fantastic. Now, in the process of cutting all of these cuts, I accidentally stretched this out by a little bit. You see, it's supposed to be 234 millimeters between this cut and that cut. However, it is actually 238 millimeters. So instead of leaving a 3 millimeter overhang on each side, you're left with, as you can see right there, a 1 millimeter overhang on each side. And 1 millimeter of overhang is not much at all. It's the amount that will snap off if you look at it wrong. So that's obviously not going to work. Now, why is that such a big problem? That is such a big problem because if I want to have my 3 millimeter overhang that I talked about earlier, I'm going to have to use pieces of wood that are longer than 240 millimeters. Now, that is a problem because in the terrarium, the space between there and there where the Kumiko has to go, that is 240 millimeters and I can't make it bigger, right? The issue is, I originally was thinking I would recess the Kumiko a little bit into the side supports for it. I thought that would look a little bit cleaner, and it would look a little bit cleaner. but I didn't want to do it because it was going to be a lot of extra work and precision. However, if I want to use the size of horizontal pieces for my Kumiko that will actually work with the jig I made, then I have to make that 240 millimeter gap a little bit bigger. So I have to route out recesses in the middle supporting piece and the two side pieces on that front edge of the terrarium. Now it's not only going to look a little bit better, but it's also going to function a little bit better. We're making progress, but progress at the at the expense of a lot of extra work. Because I'm having to use a new length of strip, I had to go get more paint stirrers so that I can make more strips, because I already cut down most of mine to the what I thought was correct length. So slicing these down, putting them in the jig, and then getting to work here. So I've got the strips in there, and then I've put this little piece right here to tension them and push them in this direction, and then I've got a shim right here to account for any loose space right there. So they're like locked in. I have made what I'm going to call my rough draft for the Kumiko. I'll show you what's up with it and why I'm calling it a rough draft. So it looks decent on camera, I think, but up close there are a lot of things that aren't satisfactory. One, some of these pieces that are supposed to be symmetrical, like those two longer portions of these three smaller ones that fill the triangle, they're not actually the same length. Some of these angles are not lining up as well as I'd like them. You can see a gap there between the ends of this triangle. If I turn it over, you can see an even worse gap. Some of the cuts are not as clean as I'd like. You can see some chip out on the end. Also the long horizontal pieces, they're fragile. They've got just really wonky cuts in some areas, and it's a good practice. It's been nice to make this little thing, but I'm starting over from scratch because this is just far, far, far from the quality I'm looking to get. Moment of truth. Been working on these for a good while now. Now I get to see how they turned out. Hopefully a lot squarer and neater than the one on the rough draft. That is nice. That is nice. I feel pretty good about that. There's a little bit of unevenness in some of them, but I think it's nothing that my miniature little sanding stick can't fix. Nice. Cool. Okay, I'm really happy with that. Incredible. I was worried I was gonna have to make a whole nother jig. I went a whole lot slower, did a whole lot more depth checks, did a whole lot more worrying about the angle that I was cutting at. This is stellar. tell you how this Kumiko is going. So you remember I had the rough draft piece. I remade the 2 long horizontal slats. I actually made 4 of them. I've got 2 of those long pieces being used right now to make half of the vent to the level of having the square pieces, none of the angled pieces with the Kumiko yet. When trying to make the second half, I broke one of the long horizontal pieces, so I made another that I then broke. So then I made another that I then broke. So then I made another that I then broke. So I made another that I then broke. So it's been kind of frustrating. So what I'm doing now is making another and trying not to break it again. We're gonna see how it goes. I don't know if there's something that I'm just overlooking that I wasn't doing on the first one that I'm now doing that's causing it to break. But the first one went pretty smooth. The second one is, it's taken some time. So I didn't think it was gonna go smoothly, so I'm not surprised, but I am trying to make this the last time that I remake these. So I have to take another paint stir, sand the paint off, cut it down lengthwise, then plane it to be exactly even with the rest of these. Then I have to put it into this jig and then wedge it in with the other long pieces that I broke, secure it in with this last little shim, and then from there I can cut all of these 14 cuts, which will be actually 2 cuts per, so 28 cuts, and then sand in between those cuts. And then I can assemble the 14 little small pieces that go into it. I've already got some of those done, and along the way, hope I don't break any of these 3mm little tiny pieces of wood. So, onto it. It is cold enough in here that my hands are well and truly numb, or at least the ends of the fingers to some degree, which means if you're not careful when you're sanding something, you can accidentally sand the very end of your finger off and not really notice. It's in the jig, it's time to cut it. Here's to hoping I don't snap it. Last cut is made. Now I get to take it out and see if it's up to standard. There are a couple parts I'm worried about. All right, it's a little rough, but I'm cleaning up with the sandpaper anyway, so I'm gonna clean it up, see how it looks, see if it's usable. If not, we'll be on, mark like 6. There's one gap, this one, second to the end, that I'm a little worried about it being too big, but I think it is, I think it's gonna be good. I'm gonna give it a go with the smaller pieces installed, and if I don't break it and it looks good, then we'll use it. It did not break. We're good to go. I am so relieved that that worked. You can see the second one sitting up there on the terrarium. I actually have one last thing to refine, and unfortunately it is in the most fragile part of this whole thing. If I screw this up, I have to restart. I need to sand that tiny little area right there. It's a little bit too small to accept the piece. Still a little too tight, a little too tight. If it's going to break, it's while I'm doing this, while I'm pushing this in and pulling this out. Oh, we're getting close, we're getting close. All right, I think one more final pass with the sandpaper and we should be in. I'm being very careful not to press up on that skinny end. Right here, I'm just trying to drag that little burr of wood into the center where I can hit it with the sandpaper. I can't use any leverage against the side piece here. Here we go. That is it. We're in, we're done. I'm not touching it. Now onto the angled pieces. If all goes well, this should be the last diagonal piece. This is where these jigs come in handy. What I've done is I take these little strips of wood and then put a 45-degree bevel on them. This side's got half its bevel, you can see there, and I'm about to give it its other half, and then we'll throw it into the rest of the Kumiko and see if it fits. Both sides are beveled. We've got one slot open right there. The other one is done. Let's see. Oh, perfect. This is the kind of fit I want. See how it is barely sticking in there, but it's tight enough that even that holds it in. Fantastic. And with that, all of the 45-degree angled pieces are cut. All right, next up, I will be making the little tiny pieces that make up this little three-pointed shape that goes in each one of these triangles. This is the rough draft from earlier. Now, it is the same spec as my final drafts that are sitting over there, except I need to improve on some things that are in this one, and I need to figure out how to do that. The main thing that I want to improve on, besides the gaps and some of the just slop in this, is in this triangle structure right there. You see this three-pointed structure we've got inside it. It contains two longer pieces, one shorter piece. Those two longer pieces are supposed to be the exact same length. In this, they're not the same length. However, they take up the right amount of space. So I need the same amount of overall length in my final draft, but I need the pieces that make it up to be identical, whereas in this one, they're not. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to average out the length between these two pieces in the sloppy rough draft, and that should give me the length of pieces that I need to take up the right amount of space and be proper in my final draft. I don't see why it wouldn't work, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay, this first piece is sitting right at 14 millimeters. The second piece is sitting right at 15 millimeters. So they're a millimeter difference, so I need to do 14.5 millimeter long pieces, and that should give me the proper lengths for my final draft. To catch you up to speed, I'm trying to get, with this jig and the 67.5-degree angle here, I need it to be 2/3 of the way through this way and 1/3 of the way through this way, so the apex of those two angles meeting is 2/3 down from the top of this strip, and this strip is 3 millimeters. So 1 millimeter this way, 2 millimeters this way. It's just a little small, to be very precise. I'm trying my best, but you end up with micro adjustments along the way. So what I've been doing is making these pieces slightly larger than they're supposed to be. I think I told you they needed to be what, like 14.5 millimeters. I'm making them 15 and then fine adjusting. So first intersection done. I'm just gonna plug and chug and move along on this. I tell you what, y'all, when your fingers are cold enough that you can't tell if you injure them, working with tiny little pieces of wood this big and soon ones that are gonna be about half this length is somewhat tedious. I'm having a absolute blast doing this, but it would be probably a bit easier if it was not, snowy and like below freezing outside. As you can see with that last installation, there are some things that just don't quite line up perfectly no matter how well you think you're doing. So I think the process for this is going to be me making the entire thing, completing it, and then going back and just looking at it with a really critical eye and probably switching out a fair amount of the pieces if I don't feel like they sit perfectly well with each other. I don't have the experience of a professional. I just started woodworking like a couple months ago. So I can't expect professional quality results without a whole lot of refinement on my behalf. So I'm gonna get the result I want, but it might take me a hell of a lot more work than it would if I'd been pretty experienced at this. This process has taken me significantly longer than I thought it would. The Kumiko, that is. It's coming along. I've got, what is this, 2, 4, 6 out of the 16 little miniature squares completely done. This piece at least, you know, we're coming along. We're coming along. However, it's been tedious. It's been tedious, let me tell you that. It's taken a lot more trial and error than I thought, and one major thing that I would certainly change if I was starting over is, you see, I've got these 2 jigs, and in order to save materials and work and all that, I put 1 angle on this one, and I put 2 angles on this one. Big issue is that because there's 1 stop block shared between 2 angles on that second jig, in order to adjust one, I have to unadjust the other. So I can't get a consistent workflow going. It hasn't been working like that. I've been having to do it in very small batches. I'm not quite sure if I'm gonna change it or not. I'm a little bit susceptible to a sunk cost fallacy here. So, I don't know. We'll see, we'll find out. Sunk cost fallacy is a fallacy for a reason. So, I changed it. I'm plugging and chugging. All right, I have plugged and chugged, and it is 7 hours later. I'm at 13 of the 16 little squares done, which I'm really excited about. I'm very close to being done. That leaves me only 1.5 of those repeating patterns left. So we're kind of right at the finish line for this Kumiko panel stage of the project. As I've gotten tireder and the day has grown longer, my work has gotten probably a little less high quality and a lot more tedious and frustrating. So I'm leaving those last 3 squares for tomorrow. I've got 1 day left in the weekend to finish this, and that's plenty of time. So once those 2 are fully assembled, from there we go to some sanding, maybe some substitutions if I don't like some of the pieces, and then we can close the page on the Kumiko chapter, throw it up on YouTube, and hopefully you'll be watching it. That calls it for today's work. I will see you tomorrow. Hopefully, this is the last day. Good morning. Welcome back. Good times ahead. All right, I have 1 little triangle left in the Kumiko to finish it. And if you don't want to see the process of filling that, then skip to here in the video and you'll see, jump right to the end product. But in case there's anyone who wants to see the process of filling each one of these individual triangles, if you want to see the workflow, I'm going to show you here. And there will be cuts in this, but it's just between that camera and this camera. They're both running at the same time. So no added time, no subtracted time. This is how long it takes to make each one of these little triangles. And that's after doing 15 of them. So keep in mind, the original speed was much slower, but here we go. So I'm going to start by making the longer 2 portions of the triangle. Getting even stock size has been very important for standardizing the process, as you can imagine. I'm getting the same length on these, and you can see I'm leaving a little gap right there where I'm holding it, and that's not a length I've measured. I've just learned over time that this is the correct length for these. from there, I am taking it over to the first angle jig. The closer you get the piece to the final length, the easier this part's going to be, because you're going to have to eat through less of this material with the chisel. All right, there's side 1 done on that angle, now on to side 2. And especially when I'm getting to the end of these cuts, I'm kind of pushing down like that, so that I'm more slicing forward with the same direction of the grain instead of cutting across it, because you can get some tear out on the ends of these pretty darn easily. All right, there is the angle on the first one of the long pieces. Now on to the second one here. This is that one that I've got to get 2/3 down, and I think I've done a pretty decent job with that right there. Giving it a slight bit of sand. Now, on to the next one. The stock I'm using for this is some of this leftover wood that I had from all of these long pieces that I ended up breaking a million times. So it's the correct like thickness, but obviously I have to get it the correct length before I can start working on it. And I'm doing that with a combination of the handsaw and some pretty aggressive 60 grit sandpaper. Again, leaving that same little gap, going to the handsaw, taking this off. It doesn't always come out straight, so from there I'll sand. And this is just so I can get an even and nice square surface on the stop block of the jig. I've liked cutting the long angles first, or the more shallow angles first. I can't quite say why, it just feels better. If I push too perpendicular here, or don't kind of sweep it over there at the end, or if I try to take out too much material at once on these passes, it has been very prone to tear out, and I've had to remake a lot of pieces. And those remade pieces, or the throwaways that caused me to have to remake another piece, those are what I will be using for the stock on the third smaller piece that makes up the end of the triangle, or three-pointed structure. I don't know, it's not really a triangle, it feels a triangle. Not treating my jigs 100% the best. You probably saw in that last cut, got a little bit into the face of the jig with the chisel, which I don't love. Alright, second long piece is done. Now, like I said, I'm using one of these throwaway bits that I made earlier for the other little miniature piece. just to save myself a tiny bit of effort, I'm rough cutting it to a nearly 45-degree angle, and I think I cut that too short actually. Reference, yeah, a little too short. I'm just rough cutting it with the chisel to around 45, so I have less material to take off when it's actually time to put it to a 45. This one, did I make it too small again? I think I did. I'm trying to be too quick here. Okay, oversizing this one, a little more material to take off, but I don't want to have to worry about that. All right, now, other jig, the big long one, huge jig for the tiny little piece of work it does. But on this one, we're just shaving these 45s. And if I have a piece like this, where it's kind of rough from those roughed in cuts I made, I start with the rougher side hanging out of the jig so that I can shave off more material, getting it down to the right size. If it's even on both sides, it doesn't really matter in terms of roughness, but if there's a rougher side, that's what I'll do. A little bit of tear out there. Tiny little bit. I don't know if you can see this. This camera is much worse than that camera. I don't know if you can see that tear out. I'm just gonna give it a little sand. It's so barely surface level that even a tiny little bit of sanding can probably clean it up. Nice, yeah, invisible. Okay, so got all three pieces. Here is the part where we see if I cut them to the right size. Now, if you look at these two, focus. If you look at these two, they've got a kind of longer side of the angle and a kind of shorter side of the angle. The two short sides butt up against each other. So it would be pointing this way, and if I want it to point the other way, I'll have to just flip them around. Here we go. These guys going in. Right off the bat, they feel pretty decent. Now, if this doesn't fit in here, then I'm going to have to cut another little shaving off here. Just clean it up. And I want this to be a tight enough fit that it almost seems like it's not going to fit at first. There we go. Very nice. Very nice. And there we go. Long time in the making, y'all, but we are finished with the two panels. In terms of shape, I've got to clean them a bit. You can see there's definitely some rough patches on this one. There's some sanding that needs to go into it, but wow, I am happy with that. Very, very cool to have done this. It's been a long time coming. It's been a long time coming. Hours into this, making the jigs, learning how to use the chisels right, learning how to stop screwing things up constantly. I'm pleased. I'm pleased with this. This is nice. Would you look at that? Would you look at that? Wow. Obviously some finishing to do. They're not entirely perfect. I've got some sanding to do. I've got some gaps maybe to address, but look at that, y'all. It's been a labor of love. It's been a long time coming. I'm really happy to have this to this level right now. It's been tedious. It's been tedious. Let me tell you, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's been tedious. I've screwed up a lot. I've learned a lot. I've been frustrated. I've been pleased. I've been overjoyed. I've been angry. I've been bored, and I've been excited, all on this same thing. And it's something that I, 6 months ago never would have even considered doing at all. But here I am, months into a general woodworking project that was conceived out of a random idea at work one day, and I think I've just finished the most tedious part of this whole process. So I'm feeling pretty over the moon right now. I've been at this project for a good bit now, and this is the first time that's really felt like, oh, like we're gonna be getting this thing done. It's just nice. It's just really nice, y'all. Like I said, I've learned a ton. If you've done anything like this before, I would really appreciate you letting me know anything that you think I should have done different or could have done better, or any way that you like to do it in the comments. I've learned enough and screwed up enough and learned how not to screw up enough again, that I've got a page on my notebook filled with things I learned and what I do different, and that's going to be my next video. So if you want to contribute to that, I'll have a section for comment contributions. I don't know if anyone's even going to comment anything at all, but I wanted to let y'all have the opportunity to do that if you feel the want to do that. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching this process. Thanks for watching me struggle through this. Thanks for sticking with me while I've been taking oodles of time to get this done. I'm happy with where we're at now. So really appreciate your viewership. If you feel like subscribing, it would mean a lot to me, and I will catch you in the next installation of this project. Man, like, I'm just pleased. I'm just pleased. Thanks.